A soft rain had been falling the night I found myself sitting alone in an airport lounge, watching strangers hurry toward destinations I'd never know. The glass wall in front of me trembled with the hum of the storm, and the reflections of passing faces blurred like watercolor strokes. In that quiet, somewhere between the announcements and the thunder, I saw a family walk by. Father carrying bags, mother guiding two children, everyone moving in a rhythm that felt almost rehearsed. There was a gentleness in the way the man stepped aside for his wife, the way she adjusted her scarf with serene confidence. For reasons I couldn't fully explain, the sight tugged at something in me I had ignored for years. I've spent my life believing I understood what it meant to protect or respect. I thought modern ideas had all the answers. Yet watching that family, I felt a strange contrast forming inside me, like I had been looking at the world through glass smudged with fingerprints. And somewhere in my chest, a quiet question began to stir. Not loud, not confrontational, just a subtle nudge that wouldn't let me look away. That question followed me all week. It slipped into conversations I wasn't having and appeared in the pauses between my thoughts. Why did that moment at the airport feel so grounded? Why did it carry a peace I couldn't name? I'd heard people say many things about Islam, some respectful, some harsh, some ignorant, but none of those voices explained the steadiness I had witnessed. And somewhere deep inside, a curiosity began to bloom. I wanted to understand how a faith so often misunderstood could shape such dignity in the people who followed it. I didn't know where to begin, so I started with stories, clips, interviews, reflections. One of them was a discussion about how Islam uplifts and safeguards women, and hearing it felt like someone had opened a window in a room I'd been sitting in with stale air, not because it was dramatic, not because it was loud, but because it was deliberate, rooted, certain. And as someone raised in a world where values shift like sand under bare feet, that certainty felt almost revolutionary. The more I listened, the more I realized that Islam didn't view protection as ownership, nor strength as dominance. It framed responsibility as a form of love and honor as something sacred, not performative. I remember pausing after a line about how God commands men to treat women not as equals in a competition, but as partners in a divine trust. That phrasing shook me. It carried weight. It carried expectation. It carried a vision of balance that my own society had been trying to rebuild with broken tools. It amazed me that the foundation of this perspective wasn't human invention, but divine instruction. Not a trend, not a movement, not a negotiation with culture, but a command woven into the structure of worship itself. A man isn't honored for overpowering a woman. He's honored for supporting her, uplifting her, protecting her dignity as something entrusted to him by God. And a woman isn't elevated by acting like a man. She's elevated by being exactly what she was created to be, with a strength that is both fierce and gentle. The revelation struck me even harder when I stumbled upon a verse explaining how believers, men and women, are garments for one another. Garments, a metaphor so intimate, so human, so profoundly layered that it took me a few minutes just to breathe through it. Clothes protect, they warm, they shield from harm and conceal what should remain private. They bring comfort and cover and dignity. The more I thought about it, the more I felt something in me soften, almost like a knot loosening. Islam didn't elevate women through slogans. It elevated them through divine purpose. As I sat with that truth, I started to trace moments from my own life, conversations with women who felt pressured to be everything at once, to fight battles that were never theirs to carry alone. And I realized how often our world mistakes liberation for exhaustion. We hand women 1,000 extra weights and call it empowerment. We tell them protection is weakness, gentleness is outdated, and needing support is something to be ashamed of. But the more I learned about Islamic teachings, the more I saw a different vision emerge. One where balance is sacred, roles are dignified, and responsibility is not a burden, but a form of worship. This understanding didn't come to me quickly. It unfolded slowly, like morning light creeping into a quiet room. Every verse, every explanation, every story peeled away another layer of assumptions I didn't know I carried. And somewhere in that unfolding, I felt my heart begin to change shape. I didn't convert, I didn't suddenly claim to know everything, but I found myself respecting something deeper than I had ever expected to. The wisdom of a faith that refuses to treat femininity as a flaw or masculinity as a weapon. What surprised me most was how Islam frames protection. It isn't about control, it isn't about superiority. It's about responsibility, one that men are accountable for before God himself. And when I compared this to the world I grew up in, the contrast was startling. This world says, well, stand alone or you are weak, but Islam teaches stand together so no one collapses. This world says your value is in how loudly you demand it, but Islam teaches your value is inherent because God himself gave it to you. This world says strength is in independence, but Islam teaches strength is in interdependence built on mercy. I started noticing this wisdom everywhere, in motherly tenderness, in the quiet resilience of daughters, in the calm authority of fathers who lead with compassion instead of ego, in the unspoken trust between spouses who see each other as gifts, not rivals. I remembered an older woman I once knew, someone who carried her life with a mixture of laughter and long, unspoken sorrows. She used to say that the hardest thing in this world was needing help and pretending you didn't. When I think of that woman through the lens of what I've learned now, I wonder how different her life might have been in a system that honored support instead of stigmatizing it. And then there was a story I read about a man in Medina who became angry with his wife. Before he could act out of that emotion, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, reminded him that the best among men are those who are best to their wives, not the strongest, not the richest, not the most influential, the best. That single instruction echoed in my mind for days. It was an anchor line that refused to loosen its grip on my conscience. Greatness is measured not by power, but by gentleness. The more I explored, the clearer it became that Islamic protection is not a cage, it's a canopy, a shelter, a shield forged not from fragility, but from reverence. And I found myself wondering why so many people misunderstand this, why we reduce sacred teachings to stereotypes, why we unearth ancient wisdom only to bury it again under noise. There's a scene I keep replaying in my mind. A grandmother in a small village I visited years ago, sitting on a woven rug outside her home. Her hands were weathered from decades of work, yet she held herself with a dignity untouched by hardship. She offered tea without hesitation, as though generosity was her native language. When I look back at that moment through what I've learned now, I see something I couldn't before, a woman grounded in a culture shaped by faith. Not one shaped by trends. A woman who knew her worth without needing a billboard to tell her. And maybe that's what struck me most. Islam doesn't chase validation. It defines it. It doesn't shout for attention. It stands firm in principles that outlast eras. And in a world where everything feels temporary, jobs, opinions, even values, there's something profoundly moving about a structure built to endure. I am not Muslim, but the more I learn, the more I feel a quiet admiration settling into me, like the last ember of a fire that refuses to go out. I find myself slowing down in conversations, choosing my words more carefully, listening, really listening when people speak about their faith. And every time I witness the peace that sincere Muslims carry, I feel as though I'm being invited into a room filled with soft light and still air. I don't pretend to understand everything. I don't claim expertise or spiritual authority, but I do know this. There is a wisdom in Islam that speaks to the deepest needs of the human heart, a wisdom that shields without smothering, that honors without idolizing, and that guides without demanding applause. Tonight, as I finish these words, rain taps gently against my window again, almost like it's reminding me of that moment in the airport when all of this began. I think of that family, their harmony, their quiet dignity, and how a simple scene opened a door in my understanding. I think of the verses, the teachings, the stories, the depth, And I realize that sometimes the most transformative truths enter our lives not with thunder, but with a whisper. If there is one thing I carry forward from this journey, it's this. Real protection is an expression of love, not power. Real honor is granted by God, not society. And real peace, true bone-deep peace, comes from living with purpose, not pretense. I'm grateful for every glimpse of that wisdom, grateful for the way it humbles me, steadies me, and reminds me that the world is wider than my assumptions. And though I stand outside the faith, I feel its beauty reaching toward me like a lantern held out in the dark. May I always walk toward that light with sincerity, and may this final thought linger longer than my voice. Some truths don't need defending, they simply need to be witnessed.